Hello everyone. It's been a while since I started this series. I started in 2019, and now it's the beginning of the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. Is now the best time to go into how the current pandemic really isn't going to hold a candle to climate change? Probably not, but I'm stuck inside with nothing better to do, so hold on, because this is going to get ugly. I've already talked about why climate change is real and how people just aren't doing much about it. Now it's time to go over why that's such a bad thing. Okay, so starting off with the most obvious, sea level rise. Melting glaciers will rise the average level of the sea. This will cause port city damage and flooding. Port cities are major trade centers, so that turns into major economic damage. You think it's bad right now? Right now, people just don't want to gather in large groups. Wait until the shipping infrastructure literally gets smashed to pieces by the sea. It also turns into the complete destruction of certain cities. Coastal Florida and big chunks of Italy are likely to be New Age Atlantises in the next 100 to 200 years. So obviously, that sucks on its own, but events don't just happen in a vacuum. People across the globe are connected, whether they realize it or not. Those displaced people have to go somewhere. There will be entire island peoples displaced by the emissions of America and China. So if they ask for sanctuary on our lands, they'd be well within their rights, don't you think? So that whole border issue we're facing right now, it's about to get a lot worse. And since that's an issue so many conservatives seem to prioritize, how about paying attention to this much larger issue? Issue number 2. Climate change enhanced heat waves don't just kill the sick and elderly. Sometimes huge swaths of animal life are wiped out. We're already seeing this happen, and this is still just the early days of climate change. Let's take a look at one country, Australia. A lot of you might not know this, but climate change has already killed half the Great Barrier Reef in the last 4 years. With temperatures constantly elevated, there's no real rest years for the reef to recover between the hot years that kill off the small plants and animals that make up the delicate reef ecosystem. These kill-offs are called bleaching because all it leaves is the bones. If you ever wanted to see the Great Barrier Reef in your lifetime, you should plan to do so before 2024. At the rate this thing is dying, it might not survive past that point. One less world wonder in the world. The heat's affecting other populations as well. Take the spectacled fruit bats in Australia. A third of them died in just 2 days during a particularly nasty heat wave that put temperatures at 42 degrees Celsius or 107.6 degrees Fahrenheit. It's situations like these that are going to become more common as we just sit around saying there's nothing we can do, when we have renewable energy, nuclear energy, hydrogen, etc. If we don't accept some hardships and expense, others will die. Point 3. When people think vulnerable ecosystem, they don't often think insects, but insect populations are going to be in a crazy flux. When I was researching this, I was actually worried we'd just be dealing with more mosquito-borne illnesses, gnats, basically the nastier bugs that tend to live closer to the equator, which would be able to move further north because it'd be warmer. But it's actually a lot worse than that. It really becomes an extension of point 2. Insects are facing the prolonged assault of industrial pesticides and climate change. It's definitely not all climate change on this point, but many insect populations are already seeing diebacks. You may have heard about bee farms having issues recently. That's actually a super big deal. Losing any number of pollinating insects reduces agricultural productivity, causing many famine areas, causing increased food prices, not to mention having rippling effects up the food chain for anything that ate those insects. So, as I'll probably repeat a few times in this section, everything is connected on this planet in a big delicate mesh, and we can deal with a string being frayed here or there, but those effects start to pile up and ripple out pretty fast. Point 4. When you combine less land to share from sea level rise, less food from the insect population dropping, and people and animals just straight up dying from heat waves, you get a lot of global strife. No one can predict exactly how things are going to play out on the human end of things, but it's safe to say that with food scarcity, displaced people, and destruction of entire cities and ecologies, there might be some kind of armed conflict that arises from all that. Again, it's impossible to tell exactly who would be fighting who, so I'll just leave that thread hanging. Point 5. Okay, so there's this thing called permafrost. The name pretty much explains it. It's an area that just never normally thaws. The problem here is that microbes in that soil will begin converting that no longer frozen matter into carbon dioxide and methane just as soon as it starts thawing. Methane is 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon, it's just less common, so it gets less press. So global warming starts melting this frost, which releases more greenhouse gas, which just starts an ugly positive feedback loop where our global warming causes even more global warming, and goes from something we could probably maintain to a point where we would need to be pulling carbon and methane out of the air to possibly have a chance of getting the feedback loop under control. To put that into perspective, no one on the planet is even talking about bringing us to negative emissions. We're only trying to reduce emissions, maybe get to net zero. Point 6. Here's where we get into the real brick shitting. So if you feel like elevating yourself about, oh, yay high, let's just say you've been warned. So just about everyone knows about the asteroid impact that ended the reign of the dinosaurs about 66 million years ago, but that only ended about 76% of all life on Earth. There was another event further back in history called the Great Dying that occurred about 251 million years ago. The Great Dying was caused by an enormous volcanic eruption, possibly boosted by an asteroid impact, that spewed great plumes of carbon dioxide into the air, which fed various forms of bacteria that began emitting large amounts of methane. If that sounds awfully familiar, it should. We went over it right in the last point. The Earth warmed, the oceans became acidic, and life itself almost ended. 96% of all ocean species went extinct, and so did 70% of all land species. I'm not saying that all this is going to go exactly as it did so many years ago, especially not for the next 100 to 200 years, but you have to remember 200 years really isn't that long. It's like 2 really generous lifespans. My great-grandma lived to be 101. She went from a time before anyone had electricity to the internet. If you don't think climate change is going to impact you in your lifetime, you're either going to die before your time, or you're just dead wrong. Point 7. The Great Etc. There's going to be ocean acidification, acid rain, and just general unpleasantness. Honestly, it could take a while to go through all the possible ramifications associated with various climate change tipping points, so I'm just going to cop out and leave point 7 a resounding etc. Okay, I think to wrap this up, I want to talk about economics, specifically the tragedy of the commons. Imagine for a moment that you have some grassland that can support 4 cows. Now imagine that no one owns this grassland, yet there are 4 people looking to graze some cattle there. Logically, they could each put down 1 cow and everyone would be happy. But what if they're making decisions without considering anyone else? If that's the case, then each farmer thinks to himself, I can buy 4 cows and fully utilize this field. Each farmer goes out and buys 4 cows, and all 16 cows starve as they fight for grass. 4 broke farmers, 16 dead cows, and the least optimal choice. But also the most probable choice if no one converses with the others before making a decision. I'm going to go into a personal anecdote here, because I think it's pretty relevant. In one of my college economics classes, we were given a cool multiplayer exercise on the computer. Basically, we could fish or farm. Farming was worth 1 point, and fishing was worth 3. So fishing was the best thing to do for us every time. There was a catch though. Heh, fish pun. There was a finite number of fish. Every turn, the fish would reproduce, and the next turn there would be a few more fish. But the rate they reproduce was lower than the rate we were fishing them at. So logically, we'd have to spend a few terms farming to keep this resource. What made things even worse is that there was a minimum viable fish population. Once the population of fish went too low, they would be unable to reproduce effectively, and we would, in this exercise, then be better off just fishing them to extinction. So in this scenario, everyone knew every turn what the fish population was. Everyone knew what the minimum population was. The only missing bit of information was what the other players would do. We fished these fish to extinction every single time. We, educated, logically minded economists in training, with full information of every variable, drove this population to extinction time and time again due to greed and our spirit of competition. The story doesn't have a happy ending. This is the one event in my life that makes me question people's ability to rally around a common threat, despite the outrageous social and economic benefits. If you're wondering what the point of that story was, I'll lay it out in simple terms. Our atmosphere is the commons, and we gain a lot of benefit from being able to burn coal and pollute it. If America were the only actor on the stage, we might even be able to get away with it a few more years. But everyone continuously acting in their own selfish best interest actually leads to the worst possible outcome for all parties. In all economic textbooks, the way to solve the tragedy of the commons is with privatization. Since owning sections of the atmosphere is a little more complicated than owning a farm, what that breaks down to is a cap and trade system, where a certain amount of pollution is allotted, and then power companies and other major polluters can buy other people's pollution allotments, if so desired. Unfortunately, this plan hasn't seen much traction in any of the political arenas, and it's been floating around for at least 10 years, probably longer. Still, I want to end things on a positive note, so I want to thank you for watching this far. If you liked and or disliked what you saw, hit those like and or dislike buttons to let me know what you thought. Please share this video with other people you know so they can get a better understanding of what we're facing right now, and please do your part in your local community. Email a congressperson. Ask your friends and relatives what they think about climate change. Just opening a dialogue and spreading some awareness is a big help, especially in the South. Thanks again. See you later.